They came with white coats, patents, and promises, yet left behind ruined cotton fields and poisoned trust. When President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso ordered the destruction of genetically modified mosquitoes backed by billion-dollar funding from the Gates Foundation, the world paused. Was this the act of a misguided populist or the awakening of a continent that remembers too well? The experiment, wrapped in the noble goal of eradicating malaria, was just the latest in a long line of foreign interventions, each cloaked in philanthropy, each leaving scars. To many in Africa, this was not a debate about DNA. It was a struggle for sovereignty, for dignity, for the right to ask, who decides what flies over our skies and flows through our veins? Stay with us. What's unfolding in Burkina Faso may rewrite the ethics of science on African soil. Subscribe to keep the memory alive. They called it Target Malaria, a project with a futuristic name, backed by futuristic science, but executed on very ancient fears. At its core, the idea seemed genius. Scientists targeted Anopheles gambiae, one of Africa's deadliest mosquitoes, and engineered its genes to produce mostly male offspring. Since only female mosquitoes bite and spread malaria, the hope was to collapse their population, and with it, the disease. But hope, when carried in foreign hands, often carries weight, heavy weight. The genetic modification wasn't done in Ouagadougou, nor in Bamako or Nairobi. It was executed in state-of-the-art European laboratories, most notably at Imperial College London. The very heart of the project, the DNA edits, the intellectual property, the patents, remained under Western control. What remained for Africa? To rear, release, and report. To play host, not partner. This raised a question as sharp as a sting. If the science is African in purpose, why is the power foreign in execution? Burkina Faso was chosen as the first African testing ground. Millions of dollars poured into building containment labs, hiring scientists, conducting community engagement campaigns. It was not a small operation. This was no trial in the shadows. This was science with the spotlight, until the lights went out. On 11 August, a batch of genetically modified male mosquitoes was quietly released into the skies of Burkina Faso. Scientists claimed it was not a gene drive, just a pilot test. Villagers were told it was safe, that the future had arrived. And then, a week later, that future was incinerated. On 18 August, President Ibrahim Traoré's government ordered the destruction of all lab samples, the suspension of the entire Target Malaria program, and a halt to field trials. No further public explanation. No diplomatic roundtables. Just a full stop. The question is, why? Had something gone wrong? Was there a breach of protocol? A revelation undisclosed? Or was it a deeper, more historical resistance stirring beneath the surface? Because for Africa, the word experiment echoes with ghosts. Ghosts of medicine unethically tested, crops genetically altered and weaponized through dependence, promises of health turning into patterns of control. What was dressed as science now looked like sovereignty breached. What flew in the air carried the baggage of memory. And in this memory lies metaphor. They released mosquitoes, but to many, it felt like releasing ownership over air, life, legacy. If a nation cannot control what flies above its sky, can it control what flows through its blood? But what changed in just 7 days? This is not the first time a solution arrived in Africa wearing a Western label, only to leave behind silence, scars, and spoiled soil. Before the mosquitoes came the seeds. In the early 2000s, Burkina Faso became the poster child for genetically modified cotton, heavily pushed by Monsanto and supported by the Gates Foundation. It was meant to be a revolution. That cotton, engineered to resist pests and boost yields, And for a moment, it worked, until it didn't. Within a few years, the cotton began to fray, not just in the fields, but on the world stage. The fiber quality dropped so sharply that Burkina Faso's exports faced international rejection. In 2016, the government abandoned GMO cotton altogether, citing severe economic losses and irreparable reputation damage. Let that sink in. Cotton once made up 60% of the country's export earnings. The pride of Burkina Faso, gone, and along with it, millions in value lost for farmers who had trusted the promise of progress. This is not a story unique to Burkina Faso. Across South Africa, where over 85% of maize and nearly all cotton is genetically modified, smallholder farmers found themselves caught in a cycle of dependence. GMO seeds are patented, meaning farmers must purchase them anew each season. Costs skyrocketed. So did chemical usage. The same companies selling the seeds were selling the pesticides to match. Resistance bred resistance, and debts bred despair. The metaphor writes itself. You reap what they patent. And from seeds, the suspicion has spread into syringes and pills. When news broke of an 8-year contraceptive being funded and distributed by the Gates Foundation, many Africans didn't ask what it was. They asked why it was here again. Why Africa? Why first? The video clarifies. The 8 years refers to duration, not age. The technology is not new. The devices are approved. The rumor about testing on children in Namibia was debunked by Reuters and Africa Check. But facts, as the speaker reminds us, cannot erase memory. Africans remember sterilization campaigns disguised as health. They remember apartheid-era population control. They remember accusations of vaccines carrying hormones. And most of all, they remember not being asked. So when the same names, Bill Gates, Agre, multinational biotech firms, appear again and again, now pushing contraceptives, then genetically modified mosquitoes, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. This isn't science, they say. This is power. This is population control repackaged as philanthropy. And it's not just the activists raising alarm. Farmers speak of being trapped. Mothers whisper of not trusting clinics. Scientists themselves question the irreversibility of releasing altered species into the wild. So what connects BT cotton to GM maize, to gene-edited mosquitoes and long-acting contraceptives? Control over what we grow, over what we eat, over who is born and who is not. If seeds could be altered, what about bodies? The word sovereignty often conjures images of borders, ballots, or battlefields. But in Africa today, it also means seeds, cells, and the right to say no. The case of Burkina Faso's sudden shutdown of the Target Malaria project isn't just a reaction, it is a reclamation. Because everything about the mosquito release, though technically approved, smelled of imbalance. Yes, Burkina Faso's own biosafety agency, environmental authority, and ethics committee signed off on the trials. Yes, local communities were told it was safe, but science wrapped in foreign funding, with patents held overseas, tested on African ecosystems. How much of that approval is true agency? The communities were engaged, but were they informed? Were they partners or just participants? When the mosquitoes flew, the questions followed. And in just 1 week, President Traoré's government answered with finality. Burn it all. The message was not against science, but against outsourced sovereignty, against being the world's proving ground, against what critics call technological colonization. Because unlike a failed development project, or even a vaccine, a genetically modified organism, once released, cannot be recalled. There's no control plus Z, no reversal. The altered genes don't ask for permission before they spread. This is not fiction. It's the lived reality of farmers whose lands now host hybrid maize instead of ancestral varieties. It's the nightmare of cotton fields degraded beyond repair. It's a pattern too familiar. Promises of modernization ending in cycles of debt, dependency, and disempowerment. And that's why the Ibrahim Traoré legacy matters, not just as a president, but as a symbol. He didn't inherit power through elections. He seized it through a coup. But what he does with it may define a new blueprint, one where scientific dignity joins political independence. By standing against a billion-dollar experiment, Traoré positioned Burkina Faso at the front lines of a new frontier: ethical science, locally defined, sovereignly executed. So the world must now reckon. Can modern science exist without exploitation? Can global partnerships respect local boundaries? In a continent where the memory of medical manipulation runs deep, nothing is neutral, especially not in a lab coat. Science, after all, is not just about what we study. It's about who controls the lens. What will the history books write about this resistance? The silence was deafening. When Burkina Faso halted one of the world's most expensive anti-malaria experiments, many expected global headlines, institutional outrage, or at least a ripple through the scientific community. Instead, the story stayed largely confined to activist circles and independent platforms. Why? Because the implications were too uncomfortable, too revealing, too destabilizing to the narrative of progress. For nearly 2 decades, Target Malaria had been hailed as the cutting edge of bioinnovation. Over $170 million USD was invested, including $155 million from the Gates Foundation and $17 million from Open Philanthropy. Scientists from the Imperial College London led the effort. NGOs held workshops. Community leaders were flown across continents. Burkina Faso was never just a trial zone. It was the showcase. And yet, within days, the showcase shut its doors. No public breach, no biohazard, just a decision, a sovereign decision that said, enough. In the West, some media outlets tiptoed around the story. Others ignored it. Even fact-checking agencies focused instead on separate controversies, like the 8-year contraceptive rumor in Namibia. But the deeper issue wasn't misinformation. It was mistrust. And Ibrahim Traoré Vision 2050 captures that mistrust with precision. His vision, articulated in speeches and actions, is clear. Burkina Faso will not be a laboratory. It will not trade dignity for development. It will not outsource its ethical compass. International institutions, however, remain uneasy. Projects like AGRA, backed by Gates and other philanthropies, continue to claim they are modernizing African agriculture. Yet, independent reviews, such as the 2020 study by the Global Development and Environment Institute, show little reduction in hunger or dependency after nearly $1 billion in funding. So who truly benefits from these ventures? Pharmaceutical giants, seed monopolies, data-hungry labs in the global north. Not the farmer in Wahiguya, not the midwife in Bobo Dioulasso, and certainly not the soil that remembers every failed promise. Still, African voices rise, from Copagen in West Africa to activists like Mariam Bessie in Nigeria. The message is thunderous. We will not be your lab rats. Their call is not emotional. It is historical. It is strategic. It is sovereign. In the debate over gene-edited mosquitoes, what's at stake is not just public health. It is who gets to write the future, who holds the power, not to test, but to choose. Who decides which lives are safe enough to experiment on? The sky over Burkina Faso is still. No more experimental mosquitoes, no more silent flights of foreign science. But the deeper question remains, what next? Because stopping a project is not enough. A void must be filled. A future must be written. by African hands, on African terms. This is the true weight of post-resistance, to not just say no, but to build the yes that follows. For Burkina Faso and nations watching across the continent, the road forward begins with restoring trust in science, but locally rooted, trust in agriculture, but community-led, trust in sovereignty, not as rhetoric, but as policy. What if the millions poured into foreign labs were redirected to empower African universities, train geneticists in Bobo Dioulasso or Bamako? What if community-led consent processes became the gold standard, not the footnote? What if innovation began with listening? Burkina Faso can lead this shift, not by turning its back on technology, but by reframing its purpose, from extractive to empowering, from outsourced to owned. And this is where metaphor meets movement. The mosquito becomes symbol, not of disease, but of decision. A symbol that whispers, we choose what flies above our soil. For decades, African agriculture was shaped by external blueprints, Agra, Monsanto, foreign-funded fertilizer drives. But today, there is a rising call to decolonize food, seed, and science. The continent's future must be cultivated with care, like heirloom seeds passed from hand to hand, not genetically locked, but generationally shared. This is about more than one nation or one experiment. It's about a continent reclaiming its right to question, to pause, to choose. It's about writing a different kind of legacy, not one dictated by billionaires and biotech, but by people whose dignity cannot be engineered. Because the legacy of this moment is not in what was destroyed, but in what it defended. And if this vision is to survive, it needs more than protests. It needs plans, partnerships, policy, purpose. Call it Ibrahim Traoré Vision 2050. Call it a future where sovereignty is not a slogan, but a seed planted in every village. If Burkina Faso can say no, who will be next? History is not always written in headlines. Sometimes it is whispered through the soil. Sometimes it rises in silence. When a nation says no, Burkina Faso's rejection of genetically modified mosquitoes may not dominate news cycles, but it echoes in every corner of a continent, reclaiming its narrative. This is not about being anti-science. It is about being pro-dignity. It is not about rejecting help. It is about demanding respect. From cotton fields, stripped of value, to seeds copyrighted by companies. From contraceptives wrapped in good intentions to mosquitoes flying under banners of philanthropy. Africa has seen what progress looks like when it does not ask for consent. But consent is no longer optional. In standing up to billion-dollar interests, President Ibrahim Traoré did more than halt a project. He affirmed a principle that African sovereignty must extend beyond flags and borders. It must reach our seeds, our bodies, our skies. This is Ibrahim Traoré Legacy, a legacy not of rejection, but of resistance rooted in memory. A legacy that dares to ask, what if our future was ours to design? And if this moment becomes a movement, then Ibrahim Traoré Vision 2050 will not just be a slogan, it will be a roadmap, a vision of science that uplifts, not extracts, a vision of sovereignty that empowers, not experiments. So let us not forget that sovereignty is not only about who votes, it is about who decides what grows, what flies, and what lives. Africa is not a lab. It is a land of memory, of hope, and of will. If this story moved you, share it. If it echoed your history, comment. If it fuels your future, subscribe. This is not the end. This is the awakening.